Hey friends, it's Zuzu again, your time-traveling storytelling monkey, and welcome back to the coziest little corner on the medieval internet, Zuzu's Time Travel. Before we get started, do me a little favor. Dim the lights, settle into your pillow fort or cozy chair, and if it's cold where you are, maybe grab a blanket that smells slightly of cinnamon and old books. You're gonna want it. Now, I want you to imagine waking up in a medieval village. It's quiet, damp, and the rooster has been particularly obnoxious this morning. You stretch, your back pops, and then you hear it. A whisper, not just any whisper, it's your name. And it's followed by the words, "I saw them do it, but you didn't do anything, right?" Welcome to Chapter 1, the whisper that started it all. Because in the medieval world, justice often started not with evidence, but with gossip. And hey, if you enjoy these kinds of slow, thoughtful wanders through history, tap that like button so I know you're here with me. And let me know in the comments, what's one rumor that went way too far in your life? I bet even your medieval twin would relate. Let's start small, not with murder, not with war. Let's begin with something truly scandalous. A missing chicken. Yes, a chicken, a single bird, feathers, squawk, egg layer, escape artist. In a medieval village, the disappearance of a chicken could cause a full-blown legal ordeal, because livestock wasn't just food, it was currency, reputation, and survival. You see, theft wasn't always some dramatic cloak and dagger operation. Sometimes a hungry neighbor just borrowed something with feathers and hoped nobody would notice. But people always noticed, especially Marjorie. Marjorie notices everything, and suddenly whispers begin. He never feeds his own chickens. I saw him looking at the coop too long. He has chicken grease on his fingers. And just like that, you're suspect number 1. What's the punishment for chicken theft, you ask? Fines mostly, sometimes public shame. But let's not spoil the fun. We're only at the beginning. You might laugh, but in a world without security cameras, phone records, or screenshots, gossip was king. Imagine if your entire neighborhood had the legal authority to testify that your vibe was off. Yep, welcome to medieval jurisprudence. The thing is, medieval communities were small. People lived tightly packed together, literally and figuratively, and word spread faster than butter on warm bread. If someone whispered something at the bake oven or mumbled at the well, by the time the village bell rang, the entire town might believe it was true. The courts didn't necessarily need evidence. They needed enough people to say, yeah, that sounds about right. And if you had a bad reputation, oof, you were already halfway to guilty. Compare it to today. Think about your local Facebook group or WhatsApp chat. Now imagine that group had the legal power to get you fined, jailed, or publicly humiliated. Still chuckling about the chicken? Let me introduce you to one of the most quietly terrifying ideas in medieval law, the tithing system. In many villages, 10 households were grouped together, not for potlucks, not for parties, but for collective punishment. If someone in your tithing broke the law, or even just looked like they might, you all could face the consequences. Yes, even if you were just home weaving socks the whole time. It was kind of like being assigned to a permanent group project, except instead of getting a bad grade, you might get fined, or lose access to land, or worse. So naturally, people paid attention, closely, suspiciously. Imagine that level of scrutiny today. Every time your neighbor plays loud music, you get a warning from the HOA and also a surprise tax. Now imagine that system, but with sheep. It was accountability. It was paranoia. And sometimes it was justice. Here's the part where things get official. The lord of the manor, or more likely his steward, didn't personally chase down chicken thieves. No. He listened to the whispers, the accusations, the rumors, and then he wrote them down, in Latin, on parchment, with a feather. Congratulations, you're now the subject of a complaint. But remember, this wasn't the courtroom you imagined today. No powdered wigs, no wooden gavels, no stern, echoing halls. Instead, it was likely a muddy patch under an old oak tree, with the community gathered around, chewing bread and whispering about your character. "Let's see what they say," the steward would mumble, opening the manor roll. Suddenly, your entire social life is being read like bad Yelp reviews. Now here's the part that really makes your fur stand on end, if you're a talking monkey like me. Because in a world where written records were rare, where priests might be the only literate people for miles, your name was your entire legal resume. If you had a good reputation, people swore oaths for you. They said things like, "Oh no, not them. They wouldn't steal a chicken. They helped me fix my roof." But if you had a reputation for being angry, or lazy, or just a little weird, well, the tithing man would say, squinting, they do smell like onions. Your odor could literally get you convicted. This is why people in medieval times were obsessed with public behavior, because private character had no legal standing. Only what the community said about you mattered. Which raises the real question, what would your neighbors say about you? Drop it in the comments. Be honest. Zuzu's listening. Imagine this. You're elbow deep in barley at the market, half listening to a bard singing off-key about St. Cuthbert's goose, when a loud bell rings. Not the church bell, the court bell. The air stiffens, conversations slow. Someone mutters, "Ah, time to see who broke what this week." Welcome to Market Day Court. Not tucked inside a cold stone hall, no. Here, law is served open air, under a hulking old oak tree that leans just slightly to the left, like it, too, is suspicious of Geoffrey the pig thief. Villagers gather in a rough circle. There are crusts of bread in hands, babies on hips, chickens under arms. The Lord Steward arrives with a scroll under one arm and a pouch of oatcakes under the other. He clears his throat dramatically. And you? You try to look like someone not about to be named in the scroll. Justice, in this world, smells like wet leaves and turnips. It sounds like sheep bleating in the background while your fate is decided. Comment below if you'd rather be judged under a tree than in a courtroom. Honestly, I kind of would. Let me introduce you to the true stars of village drama, the Steward and the Reeve. Now the Steward, he's the Lord's right-hand man. Think, a medieval assistant manager who smells faintly of onions and entitlement. He keeps the court roll, he hears complaints, and he makes passive-aggressive comments about everyone's harvest yields. The Reeve, though? The Reeve is elected by you. Well, the villagers. He's like the class monitor who also happens to live next door. Imagine being both the tattletale and the guy who lends you his shovel. These two work together. Technically. But one wants to please the Lord and the other wants to keep his neighbors from spitting in his soup. So the court is this delicate dance of, "Yes, my lord," and, "But they didn't mean to." Between them, they keep the village's mildly chaotic legal system humming like a slightly off-key lute. All right, the moment has arrived. The steward unrolls the court roll like he's unveiling a cursed treasure map. It's a long, weather-stained sheet of parchment covered in squiggly Latin, spilled ale, and questionable thumbprints. He clears his throat, dramatically. On the 10th day of St. Hilary's month, Reginald, son of Hugh, did unlawfully borrow 2 geese. Everyone gasps, except Reginald, who is already pretending to be fascinated by a patch of moss. The roll contains fines, past judgments, strange debts, and at least one entry about a pig that got drunk. No, really, there were pig-related laws. For villagers, hearing the court roll is like watching a reality show with no commercial breaks. And you hold your breath, hoping your name doesn't show up, or if it does, that it's only about that one time you accidentally harvested someone else's onions. You might think only big crimes were judged. Nope. William, son of William, allowed his fence to fall, and a sheep wandered into the cabbage field. That's it. That's the case. And William now owes 2 pence. In medieval times, property boundaries were serious business, because if your cow trampled someone's barley, They couldn't exactly file an insurance claim. Sometimes cases were so petty, they looped back around to being philosophical. Like, if a branch from your tree drops an apple on someone else's field, whose apple is it? These questions were actually asked, debated, judged. So yeah, justice back then wasn't all flames and swords. Sometimes it was about a slightly crooked fence post and a sheep with poor decision-making skills. Comment below. Would you report your neighbor's goat for breaking your herb garden? Or would you just steal their time in return? Oh, you're going to love this. In some villages, there was a person with the glorious title of ale taster. Their job? To drink ale, for justice. Okay, not just for fun. The ale taster made sure brewers weren't watering it down or overcharging. If the ale was bad, they reported it to the court, publicly, and people got fined for bad beer. Imagine living in a world where you can say, "This pint tastes like pond water," and someone has to pay you 2 pence for emotional damage. So now, as court ends, the ale taster steps forward, wobbly, slightly flushed. He squints at a brewer and says, "That last batch was suspiciously frothy." A murmur ripples through the crowd. Justice is served, pint by pint. You ever have your neighbor see you take out the trash in pajamas and then pretend they didn't? Now imagine that same neighbor deciding whether you owe a chicken, 2 pence, or public humiliation. Welcome to the medieval jury. Unlike today's clean-shaven courtrooms and solemn juries, your medieval jury was made up of local people who knew you way too well. These folks didn't just hear the case, they lived it. The same people you borrowed a shovel from, gossiped with at the well, or accidentally insulted by not complimenting their cabbage patch. They're sitting in a half circle, munching on oatcakes, ready to pass judgment. They weren't picked randomly. The steward just grabbed 12 men, usually landholders, often the usual suspects, and told them to decide. And these guys? They were tired, grumpy, possibly drunk, and probably cold, so good luck. The thing about being judged by people who know you is that you can't bluff your way out. They remember things. Didn't you take a duck that wasn't yours last winter? Didn't your cousin call my cousin's mother a frog? And unlike modern courts, the jury didn't just hear the evidence. They were expected to already know stuff. If they didn't know what happened, they were supposed to investigate it themselves. Imagine 12 nosy neighbors turned into freelance detectives, clomping around in wooden shoes and interrogating your livestock. Did the village goose see anything? No? But someone says she's been acting nervous since Tuesday. So you sit there, trying not to sweat through your wool tunic, while your life is debated like a poorly rehearsed village play. Comment below. Would you trust your current neighbors to judge your fate? Or would you end up sleeping in the stocks? Now let's talk about one of my favorite parts of medieval justice, the oath swearing. If someone was accused, they could prove innocence by swearing an oath. Not just a quiet, "I swear I didn't do it." Oh no, it was ceremonial, dramatic, and very loud. You'd gather your oath helpers, usually friends or family who didn't hate you, and all of you would stand up and swear together. It looked like a boy band reunion, but with more mud and less harmony. The catch? If no one volunteered to be your helper, it didn't look good. And if your oath sounded shaky, if you stuttered or looked nervous or flubbed a word, that was seen as very suspicious. Imagine defending yourself with nothing but tone and vibes. After all the neighborly snooping and dramatic oaths, the jury finally decides. Sometimes it's a quick verdict, sometimes it takes hours, and while there's no guilty gavel slam, there is a kind of satisfying moment when the steward nods and everyone exhales or glares. Punishments, you ask? They range from small fines to public scoldings, to standing in the stocks for a few hours while kids throw breadcrumbs at you. Not terrifying, but definitely uncomfortable. The whole thing is oddly wholesome. Justice was less about vengeance and more about keeping everyone getting along, even if that meant awkward eye contact at the next feast. Comment below. Would you rather pay a fine or stand in the town square while everyone throws stale bread at you? After court, everyone needs a drink. Seriously, it was tradition. The alehouse would be buzzing. Juries brag about their verdicts. The accused tries to laugh it off. Someone plays a crooked fiddle. And yes, the ale taster is already on his fourth cup. Justice might have been simple, but it didn't end in bitterness, usually. It ended with stories, songs, and villagers going home full of bread and barley, and maybe a few grudges, but small ones, like who took the best bench. That's how medieval justice truly functioned, as a messy, human, sometimes ridiculous process that mostly worked because people cared just enough not to break things. Too often. Let me know in the comments. Would you trust a jury of neighbors, or do you prefer a toga-wearing monkey court of one, me? Let's start with a truth no one in the village would say out loud, but everyone knew. If you crossed the midwife, your name might just mysteriously appear in the next court roll. She wasn't just the baby deliverer. Oh no. The midwife was a walking filing cabinet of secrets, gossip, and slightly judgmental glances. She knew who had a suspicious rash. She knew whose baby arrived a little too early. And when she showed up at the court, headscarf tied tight and hands folded across her stomach, people noticed. Sometimes she was called to give testimony. Sometimes she gave it without being asked. And let's be honest, if anyone was going to call you out for lying, it was the woman who had seen half the village naked in candlelight. All right, let's talk charges. Women showed up in court for all kinds of high crimes, like scolding, yes, that's a real thing, overpricing ale, and my personal favorite, holding suspiciously loud dances. Scolding, in case you're wondering, basically meant yelling too much. It was society's polite way of saying, we think you're mouthy and we don't like it. Now imagine being fined for that while your husband yells about sheep 10 feet away. Also, if you brewed ale that made someone's stomach flip like a cartwheel, the ale taster would report you, and boom, 2 pence fine. And don't even try to organize a dance during Lent. That's practically medieval anarchy. Still, most of these fines weren't harsh. They were more like little wrist slaps with a side of public embarrassment. And everyone secretly loved watching it unfold. Comment below, what's the most ridiculous thing you could be scolded for today? I'd probably get fined for over-explaining turnips. Testifying in court wasn't just for the lords and landholders. Women testified a lot about stolen laundry, about loud chickens, about men who promised marriage and then vanished faster than a cat at bath time. And they didn't show up wearing fancy silks and pearls. They came in with aprons still dusted in flour, hands stained with herbs, and the slightly damp scent of laundry left too long on the hedge. There was no courtroom drama, just a small bench, a big voice, and the occasional baby tucked under one arm. These testimonies were less objection, Your Honor, and more, that's not how it happened and you know it, Mabel. The court took it seriously, because women remembered details, who said what, when, and exactly how they said it. In order. Here's the twist most people don't expect. In most of medieval England, witchcraft accusations were rare, especially before the 15th century. That means for most of this period, women weren't burned or drowned just for brewing odd teas or talking to cats. A woman might be known for healing herbs, charms, or little prayers whispered into fire smoke, and it wasn't considered evil. It was often welcomed, sometimes grudgingly, sometimes with side-eye. If anything, women who healed others were respected, right up until they charged too much or accidentally cured someone who wasn't supposed to survive. So when Agnes the herb wife appeared in court, it wasn't because she conjured a storm. It was probably because her fee for poultices had gone from 2 eggs to 3.5 eggs plus a cheese. Scandalous. Let me tell you something spicy. Medieval widows had power. Once their husbands died, peacefully or otherwise, no one's judging, widows could own property, take disputes to court, and even manage alehouses. That made some of them unpopular. Widows didn't need permission to speak up, or brew beer, or accuse you of stealing their fence post during a thunderstorm in '86. They showed up at court in widow's black with that look like, try me. Some even refused to remarry, not because they were grieving, but because being single gave them more control over land and money. Respect. Comment below, what would you do if suddenly granted medieval widow-level freedom? Personally, I'd buy a goat, run an alehouse, and file a complaint about noisy monks. You know what causes pure chaos in a medieval village? Someone steals a spoon, not gold, not silver, just a spoon, wooden, maybe a little cracked, possibly tasted like onions and regret, but it was someone's spoon, and that someone, oh, they are not letting it go. I left it right there beside my stew bowl, says Edith, and now it's gone. She doesn't look angry. She looks determined. Everyone's a suspect. The dog, the child who chews everything, the suspicious neighbor who borrows things without asking and returns them with mysterious bite marks. Eventually, the case ends up in court. Someone stands accused. They swear they didn't touch it. Edith swears they did. And there, in the middle of a cool afternoon under the old oak, a single spoon becomes the talk of the town. Medieval theft wasn't just about things being stolen. It was also about things wandering off. If your pig wandered into a neighbor's barley and didn't come out, guess what? That's a crime. And if your loaf of bread somehow ended up in someone else's basket, well, someone's got some explaining to do. Theft could be clumsy, accidental, or surprisingly bold. A boy once took a fish from a cart and tried to hide it in his sleeve. It fell out, flopped across the mud, and everyone gasped like they'd seen a ghost. You had your little everyday thieves, like the girl who borrowed ale without asking, and your high-risk swindlers, like the lad who stole a priest's eggs. They weren't executed. They were usually fined, or mildly shamed, or had to do some labor like fixing a fence, cleaning the ditches, or helping the alewife brew next month's batch. Comment below, what's the most absurd thing you'd accuse someone of stealing in your life today? I'm torn between socks and leftover fries. Sometimes, justice didn't need big speeches. Sometimes, you just had to bring the thing back. If someone was accused of taking something, say a comb or a pie, they could end the whole drama by just walking into court and putting it gently on the steward's bench. No one said a word. The village watched. You'd hear a sniff, maybe a small gasp. The object sat there, shamefully, silently, and that was enough. You didn't need torches or pitchforks. You just needed a moment of communal awkwardness. It was like posting an apology online, but in person, in front of your aunt, your goat, and your childhood enemy. If you returned the stolen object early enough, you might avoid a fine altogether. Cue applause for passive-aggressive redemption arcs. There was once a baker's apprentice who allegedly swapped out rye flour with something else. We're still not sure what. The bread came out weirdly bouncy. Villagers noticed, and they were not amused. I bit into it, said Marjorie, and my tooth sang like a bell. Turns out the apprentice had tried to stretch the flour by mixing in ground peas. Economical, yes. Ethical, questionable. The court decided, no jail, no stocks. But the apprentice had to help fix the communal oven and was banned from baking for a month. Imagine that. A baking ban. That's like grounding someone from toast. Moral of the story? Medieval theft didn't always involve sneaky fingers. It could also involve sneaky recipes. Oh yes, someone stole a bell rope. Why? No one knows. Maybe they needed string. Maybe it was a dare. Maybe they just hated mornings. The problem? The bell couldn't be rung, which meant no one knew it was court day. Chaos ensued. People missed hearings. The steward panicked. The Reeve paced. Someone started singing the bell noise out loud to keep the rhythm. Eventually the rope was found, stuffed behind a pigsty, slightly chewed. The thief wasn't punished harshly, but they were made to stand next to the bell the following week and ring it manually for hours. Justice wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it was just really, really inconvenient. Comment below, what's the weirdest punishment you'd hand out if you were judge for a day? I'd assign people to narrate livestock thoughts in court. Let's say you insulted your neighbor. You called her goose a demon in feathers and implied her bread was hard enough to fix a roof. Harsh. Words were weapons in the medieval village, and you just dropped a cannonball. So what happens next? You don't send a text. You don't buy flowers. You don't even write a letter. Nope. You apologize, publicly, in front of everyone, while kneeling, in the mud, sometimes barefoot. Bonus humiliation if you had to wear your worst clothes, or none at all above the waist, depending on the crime and the local customs. You had to say a set formula, too. Something like, I, William son of Godebert, ask pardon of Matilda, whose bread I did wrongly insult, and promise to call her goose majestic henceforth. And everyone around you, trying not to snicker. Except your aunt, she is snickering. Sometimes just words weren't enough, so you had to offer something tangible, like bread, yes, bread, apology bread. Imagine baking a loaf with trembling hands, wrapping it in cloth, and handing it solemnly to the person you wronged. That's the vibe. The recipient could accept it and nod gracefully, or sniff it, raise an eyebrow, and say, next time, fewer pebbles. It was symbolic. Bread meant nourishment, peace, the basic stuff of life. Giving your bread to someone was like saying, let's break crumbs instead of heads. Sometimes it was paired with ale or cheese if you really messed up. Imagine modern life working like that. Sorry for the email typo, boss. Here's a baguette. Comment below. What's your perfect apology food? Mine's warm honey cake with slightly too much butter. The church porch. Ah, yes. Medieval England's #1 spot for awkward public apologies. You had to show up early. Sun barely up, dew still on the grass. Kneel or bow. Say your lines. Sometimes even hug the person you wronged. And that hug? It had to be long enough to prove sincerity, but short enough to not seem creepy. If you were lucky, a priest oversaw the whole thing, nodding solemnly like he was judging a baking contest. Some porches even had a built-in bench just for this kind of thing. It was known unofficially as the forgiveness seat. Not comfy, slightly damp, probably had centuries of apologies soaked into the wood. Afterward, some people would get up, dust off, and head straight to the alehouse to retell the moment with dramatic flair. Did you see how she barely touched the bread? Oh, the gestures. If you think modern people overuse emojis, wait until you see a medieval apology bow. It wasn't just a nod. It was a full performance. Hat off, eyes lowered, back bent like a fiddle string. Some even went down on all fours, hands out like they were presenting treasure. There was also the hand kiss. Yes, the literal kiss their hand while apologizing moment. Sometimes the hem of the garment if the person was fancy. If you had dirt in your mouth afterward, bonus points for sincerity. This wasn't just theater. It was a way of showing you knew your place. You wronged someone, you were lower now, and you'd physically show it. Unless, of course, you were one of those cheeky types who bowed dramatically just to annoy everyone. Let's be real, forgiveness wasn't always freely given. Sometimes it came with terms. You had to fix a fence, or share your next 3 cabbages, or agree to help sweep the church porch every Friday. In extreme cases, you might have to sing a song, a really bad one, in front of people. Forgiveness was a contract, and like all good contracts, it was sometimes scribbled on parchment, but more often sealed with handshakes, mumbled prayers, and eye contact that said, "Don't screw up again." Once accepted, though, that was that. People moved on, or at least pretended to, until next Lent. Forgiveness wasn't soft and warm and fuzzy. It was practical, necessary, so people could live together without endless feuds over chickens and combs. Comment below, what modern apology condition would you find totally acceptable? Mine's, make me tea every Tuesday for a month. There she goes again, Margaret the alewife, showing up in court for the 3rd time this year. Not because her ale was bad, no, people drank it gladly, but because she kept using short measures. That's right, tiny cups, ale that fizzled out halfway up the mug. Customers felt cheated. I paid for a full pint, not a puddle. The ale taster, an official position by the way, made the rounds with a specially marked jug. One sniff, one sip, one raised eyebrow, and it was off to court. Margaret always defended herself dramatically. "The wind was strong that day. It blew the foam away," she once said. Nobody believed her, but also nobody really minded that much. Her ale made you forget things, like how uneven your floor was or how your boots always leaked. Still, the court kept fining her, and she kept smiling. Then brewing again. Roger never stole anything. Not really. He just had a habit of borrowing other people's fences. "I needed a bit to fix my pen," he'd say. "Just for a week." Only the fence never came back. Or it came back, shorter. Sometimes you'd see part of your own fence quietly repurposed around Roger's geese, with your initials still carved in the wood. Subtle. People got used to it. You'd wake up, notice a few planks gone, and mutter, "Roger again?" The court didn't punish him harshly, just small fines. Occasionally public shaming. Once he had to return the entire borrowed fence during market day, plank by plank. He waved to everyone while doing it, like he was in a parade. Comment below, what modern thing would you borrow without guilt? I'm looking at your neighbor's garden hose. Mildred liked to sue people for everything. She once brought a case because someone walked across her shadow too quickly. Another time she claimed her neighbor's rooster was giving her headaches of the soul. She never won. But every manor court day, there she was. Wrinkled hands full of parchment, lips pursed, determined. People came to watch Mildred more than the actual cases, like a one-woman theater troupe. Eventually, the court gave her her own stool, and the clerk started pre-writing forms with Mildred versus already filled in. The court never banned her. Honestly, she gave everyone something to talk about, including the steward who once muttered, "If she sues the clouds, I'm retiring." Hugh was harmless, quiet, but he had a tendency to mutter things at exactly the wrong time. Once during a church feast, he whispered, "Looks like the priest's goose got more wine than we did," loud enough for everyone to hear. Another time at court, he mumbled something about the steward's shoes being made from cursed pigskin. And yet again, when fined for lateness, he grumbled, "Hope the Reeve enjoys that coin. He'll probably eat it." He didn't mean harm. He just thought out loud, with a voice that somehow always carried. The court fined him for disruptive sarcasm once, but mostly they just groaned. Villagers would lean in just to hear him mumble, like medieval ASMR. Agnes never picked a side in anything, ever. She once showed up to a dispute about stolen apples and said, maybe they fell into his basket, accidentally. At first, people were grateful, a calming voice, a peacemaker. Then it got weird. She once sat on an actual fence during an argument, swinging her legs and saying, "Let's all just agree we're confused." Eventually, the court fined her, not for the fence thing, but for causing delays by infinite neutrality. She still came to court, still sat near the fence, still said, "Both sides have good points." But people started seating her away from the actual disputes. Comment below, are you team decisive or team let's see how it plays out? I am team Agnes on Mondays. You've got one hand on a Bible that smells like damp wood and candle soot. The other, caked in something questionable from the pig pen, and suddenly everyone's staring. It's oath time. Swearing an oath in medieval courts wasn't about raised pinkies or crossed hearts. It was serious stuff. You'd place your hand on the holy book, or sometimes a relic, and swear you were telling the truth, as God is my witness. But here's the thing. Some folks took it too seriously. They shook. They cried. One guy fainted after swearing on a saint's toenail. Real story. And if you lied, God might smite you, or your crops, or your favorite goat. So yeah, people got nervous. But also, some people got creative. They technically told the truth. Just not all of it. You know, strategic memory loss. Medieval court didn't always believe just you. So you brought oath helpers, friends, neighbors, sometimes that guy who owed you turnips. They'd line up, place hands on their own hearts or the Bible, and declare, yes, this person is honest. They totally didn't steal those apples. Were these people reliable? Sometimes. Other times, it was a mutual system. I help you this week, you help me next week. Like a very dusty version of mutual likes on Instagram. The trick was to not overuse them. If John the Miller vouched for everyone, people started whispering. He'd swear his dog could read Latin. And if someone flubbed the oath mid-sentence? Embarrassing. Once, a helper sneezed mid-promise and they had to start over. Medieval court had a loophole. It was called selective amnesia. If someone asked, "Did you see Roger steal that chicken?" and you answered, "I don't remember what I saw that night," that wasn't lying. That was safe. People fumbled for excuses. It was foggy. I was tired. I may have been drunk. The chicken looked like someone else's. Once, someone claimed they were sleepwalking and ended up in the wrong barn entirely. Honestly, it worked, because unless someone else swore you were lying, the court couldn't prove otherwise. This led to a lot of mysterious memory lapses. Court records are full of phrases like, "He saith he cannot rightly remember," which really meant, he knows. He's just not risking his barley. What happened if you broke an oath? Besides being fined, that is, you might be excommunicated, or cursed, or shamed by your neighbors forever. Some people believed your livestock would fall sick. Others thought lightning would find you no matter where you hid. One villager swore falsely and then slipped in a puddle of pig muck the next day. Everyone nodded sagely like, "Ah, yes, divine judgment." Sometimes the village would avoid someone suspected of oath-breaking, like they were contagious, they wouldn't get invited to feasts, or even worse, denied extra ale. There were even whispered stories of people struck mute after lying under oath. Spooky stuff. So yeah, most folks thought twice before fibbing. Not all oaths were about stolen vegetables. Sometimes they were deep, soul-binding promises, like fealty, swearing loyalty to your Lord. You'd kneel, you'd clasp hands. The Lord would cup yours like a medieval prom photo. Then you'd say things like, "I will serve you with body, goods, and goodwill." Some lords were generous. Others, real micromanagers. If you broke that oath, it wasn't just court fines. It could be land loss or social exile. No more invites to the fancy mutton dinners. Still, people took these oaths seriously. They were like medieval marriage vows, but with more sheep. Sometimes there were oaths between neighbors too. Peace pacts, harvest sharing, even pig-watching arrangements. Comment below, what's the weirdest thing you'd willingly swear loyalty to for a free dinner? Imagine spending your whole day surrounded by ink pots, half-munched parchment edges, and a breeze that smells like warm sheep and sour ale. Welcome to the clerk's table. Medieval clerks were the Google Docs of the time, except slower, inkier, and much more judgmental. These folks recorded everything, and I mean everything. From neighborly arguments over goose poop to whose cow wandered into the Lord's cabbage patch. The scratch of quills never stopped. Parchment crinkled. Ink blots splattered. Once, a clerk fell asleep mid-case and recorded a line that read, "Plaintiff mumbled about bread," and then with a long, scribbled drool trail. Some clerks had nice handwriting. Others, chickens have drawn more legible symbols. Comment below, have you ever had to handwrite something long and just lost feeling in your fingers? Sometimes things got messy, literally. If two clerks worked side by side and one knocked over the inkwell, chaos, black puddles, screaming, smudged truth. Once a clerk accidentally wrote the wrong defendant's name and fined a man for stealing his own pig. Took 2 weeks to fix. Pig was very confused. Other times, someone might sneak a peek at what the clerk was writing. "Did you just put down that I owe 3 eggs? It was 2 and a cracked one." Disputes over records could turn wild, especially if someone swore the clerk misheard them, or wrote it down in secret ink. Not real, but they believed it. Some clerks developed code words to protect themselves, like SBQ, Kraz Slightly Bonkers Quarrel. Totally not official. You think spelling is annoying today? Back then, nobody spelled names the same way twice. If your name was Alice, the clerk might write Alice, Elise, or Alicette, depending on his mood. One clerk famously spelled Thomas 6 different ways in the same court record. Historians still laugh about it. Or cry. Hard to tell. This led to a weird sense of identity. Are you the same John who stole bread? No, I'm John, with no H. Sometimes clerks drew pictures instead. A little goose next to someone's name to remind them, this guy? Goose thief. Also, you could tell who the clerk didn't like. Their names got extra ink splatters, or suspicious smudges. Parchment doesn't stack easily, especially when it curls, smells like goat, and attracts mice. Clerks had to organize these things, usually in bundles tied with string, tossed into wooden chests, or shoved into damp cupboards. Over time, ink would fade, pages would stick together. Once, a clerk found a mushroom growing out of a roll of old fines. Every now and then, a lord would request an old case file. The clerk would spend hours mumbling and digging like a badger in a cloak. They also kept tally sticks, little notched sticks to count debts. Sometimes people paid in so many carats, the clerk had to invent new notches. Half a notch for slightly wilted. Comment below. Do you hoard receipts? Imagine them being stored in goat parchment and mouse-chewed sacks. No matter how petty, every manor court session ended the same way. Let it be recorded. Whether it was a duck-related insult, a dramatic apology, or a sheep with a suspicious limp, it got written down. And once it was on parchment, oh, it was official. Villagers would nod solemnly. The record says it. It must be true. Even centuries later, those scribbles survive. Historians pore over them, trying not to laugh at phrases like, he did strike her with a loaf, or they did argue most fervently about the spoons. So next time you write a text or file a document, just know, some medieval clerk once used precious ink to record that Agnes tripped over a goose and blamed the devil. You ever look into the cold, beady eyes of a rooster and think, yep, definitely up to something? Well, in medieval times, they agreed with you. Animals could be tried in court. Chickens, pigs, goats, even bugs. One record shows a group of locusts being politely asked to leave a village. Twice. Let's focus on one poor chicken. She laid an egg that looked weird, speckled, pointy, oddly ominous. The villagers whispered, "Witch egg." Next thing she knew, she was in court, standing in a wooden cage. No lawyer, no feathers fluffed. The smell in the courtroom? Sharp straw, earthy droppings, tension. The judge asked if she had anything to say. The clerk paused. The chicken blinked. Here's the twist. Sometimes animals had lawyers. Real, human ones. There's a documented case where a pig was defended by a monk. He argued that the pig was raised in moral ignorance and should be spared. Spoiler, the pig was not spared. But back to our chicken. Her defense? A traveling juggler who owed her owner a favor. He stepped forward and declared the egg's strange shape was God's mystery, not witchcraft. The crowd gasped. The judge sneezed. They debated. Was it a curse, or just a chicken being a chicken? Eventually, the chicken was declared innocent. The egg was buried. Yes, they buried the egg. If you think chicken court was odd, wait for this. Pigs were frequent offenders, especially for murder. Picture this. A pig escapes her pen, wanders into town, knocks over a toddler, or worse, and suddenly she's wearing a little rope harness in court. These pigs were tried like people. Sometimes they even wore clothes. Yes. There's an actual account of a pig dressed in a tunic to face trial properly. One town held a trial for a pig and brought in character witnesses. One neighbor said she seemed unusually angry for a sow. Another said, she looked me in the eye, boldly. Comment below, what would a pig's defense be today in a courtroom? Let's move on from the barnyard and into the granary. Rats? They got sued. For eating grain. How did this work, you ask? A court would formally summon the rats, out loud. A clerk would shout into the fields, "Rats of the parish of Saint-Martin-du-Bosque, you are hereby ordered to appear." When they didn't show up, shocking, their lawyer would say, "They're afraid to travel. The roads are dangerous." And the judge? He'd nod. Fair. Once the court rescheduled the rat trial 3 times. I mean, it's not easy when your defendants live in walls. Eventually, the rats were found guilty in absentia. But no one could enforce the ruling. Okay, so you're probably wondering, why did they put animals on trial? It wasn't just superstition, though yes, it was mostly superstition. In medieval minds, justice had to be visible. If an animal caused harm, people needed to see consequences, or else chaos. And a little closure. Also, animals were part of the social order. If they misbehaved, they threatened the whole balance. Kind of like when someone cuts in line at the bakery and you just stand there in moral agony. Plus, courts loved procedure. If there was a system, they'd use it, even if it involved a chicken, a monk, and a possibly cursed egg. So the next time your cat knocks over a glass on purpose, just be glad it won't be subpoenaed. Picture this. It's market day. The cobblestones are smeared with mud, chicken feathers float in the air like confetti, and the smell? A blend of fresh bread, manure, and something burning. But forget the stalls for a second. Everyone's gathered around something far more thrilling than a sack of onions. Someone's in the stocks. The accused? A man who insulted a baker's daughter. Crime. Lewd jesting. Sentence? 2 hours in public shame. He's got his head and hands locked through the wooden frame. Kids throw cabbage. A dog pees near his foot. Old Marjorie claps like it's opening night at the Globe Theatre. There's laughter, eye rolls, someone definitely eating a roasted beet like popcorn. Because, dear viewer, this was the entertainment. Reality TV, but smellier. So here's the deal with the pillory. It's like the stock's taller, meaner cousin. Instead of sitting, you're standing, head and arms locked in. Gravity is your frenemy. People spit. Some toss stale turnips. The worst? The long, slow drip of your own nose. One chronic offender, let's call him Thomas the Loud, was sentenced for blasphemy. He mocked a priest's accent. 2 hours in the pillory. Rain included, free of charge. Now the medieval crowd didn't just pass by. Oh no. They brought snacks. They stayed. Some even took notes. Ooh, he flinched at the beat. Did you see the way that cabbage bounced off his forehead? And if you fainted, well, too bad. You just hang there like wet laundry until your sentence ended. Let's talk snacks, because no public punishment was complete without a cheese whistle. Okay, not a real whistle, but hard cheese shaped like flutes for chewing. Think medieval stress relief toys. Street vendors circled the crowd shouting, shame cakes, fresh from the ashes." They were flat, slightly burnt oat cakes. People bought them not for taste, but tradition. Why? Because shame made people hungry. And if you were going to shame watch someone's social downfall, you'd better have carbs. Imagine Instagram drama with a charcuterie board. People came early, claimed spots, debated moral philosophy while biting into sour apple tarts. Did he really steal that spoon? A pewter one, at that? Not worth the beat to the face? Now, not all public shame was loud. Some punishments were whispered. Enter the confession bench. It was literally a bench outside the church with a sign that read, "In confession." You sat there quietly, sometimes for hours after a minor sin, like being caught kissing someone behind the mill. And while you sat, the gossip choir tuned up. Old ladies with keen eyes and sharper tongues circled like pigeons. Is that Beatrice's boy? He always had shifty eyes. Must be his mother's fault. If humiliation could hum, this was it. No beats to the face, just a slow roast over rumors, and you had to sit still, straight back, No sass. Any sass. Extra hour. Eventually, things got weird. Punishments became performance art. In one French town, they created a shame parade. Offenders had to walk through the market wearing signs like, "I lied to my husband," or "I took an extra loaf." One guy had to wear a giant wooden spoon on his back. Another wore bells that jingled with every shameful step, and people cheered, tossed flowers, or flour. Sometimes the punishments were so creative that people came back just to watch. Who's on the list today? Ooh, the baker's cousin. Can't miss it. You know how we love reality shows? Yeah, same thing, just with more cow dung and less commercial breaks. You know what's weird? Sometimes after all the public shaming, the turnips to the face, the drama, people actually moved on. Imagine, it's been 2 days since you were locked in the stocks. Your wrists still ache. Your pride is somewhere in the mud. And yet, the tavern doors creak open and, surprise, no one throws a cabbage at you. Instead, old Tom slides over a cup of ale. "You were stupid," he says, "but you're still family." That's how medieval communities worked, tight-knit. Grudges didn't always linger. You showed up, you admitted your mistake, you drank ale and laughed at your own beaten face. Forgiveness was rarely dramatic. It was slow. It was sticky like mead. But it happened, not because people were saints, but because they had to share soup with you. Yep, you heard me right, the apology loaf. In some parts of medieval Europe, especially in small villages, if you wronged someone, you baked them bread. Not fancy bread, not festival bread, just simple, coarse, honest bread. You'd carry it, wrapped in a cloth, maybe still warm, and offer it with both hands. Silent, humble. You didn't even say, sorry. The loaf did it for you. Of course, this didn't erase everything. If you burned someone's barn down, one loaf probably wouldn't cut it. But if you gossiped, if you borrowed a spade and never returned it, one fresh apology loaf might just patch things up. Today we send awkward apology texts. Back then, you baked. Forgiveness wasn't just a feeling, it was an action. Let's say you messed up. You got caught stealing grain. Your punishment's over. But how do you show the village you've changed? You work. You sweep the church steps. You help dig a well. You lend your mule to a neighbor without expecting a fee. You fix the thatch on Widow Brenna's roof. And little by little, people nod at you again. Invite you to feasts. Trust you with tools. In medieval times, redemption was physical. You showed it in sore hands, not in fancy speeches. Honestly, I kind of wish we had more forgiveness by doing chores these days. Feels more honest. Forget courtrooms and lawyers. Sometimes justice happened under a tree. Villagers gathered, a local elder, maybe missing 3 teeth but full of wisdom, listened. The wrongdoer spoke. The victim spoke. And the goal wasn't revenge, it was restoration. "What do you want from him?" the elder would ask. "Help in the fields? Maybe. Or, he must apologize before the whole village." And the sentence wasn't just punishment, it was relationship repair. These weren't perfect systems, but they were personal. They acknowledged that the village had to keep living together, breathing the same smoky air, borrowing the same soup ladles. The greatest moment wasn't the apology, it was when you were just included again. You helped churn butter. You stood in the feast line without whispers. You danced, badly, at the harvest fair. It wasn't loud, no applause, no grand speeches, just quiet acceptance. One day, someone asked you to watch their chickens, trusted you with the key to the shed, and just like that, you belonged again. Maybe that's the truest kind of justice, the kind that isn't about punishment or performance, but the kind that leads back to shared soup, stupid jokes, and the warmth of being needed. That's the end of the journey through medieval justice. Not just stocks and fire, but bread, sweat, and forgiveness too. Let me know in the comments, which form of forgiveness feels more real to you, words or work? Until next time, keep your soup warm and your cabbage throwable. And if you enjoyed this sleepy story, hit like for more cozy, slow-burning time travel here on Zuzu's Time Travel.